Okay, thanks very much, Greg, and hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Questions are welcome, but I know there's a wealth of knowledge and experience amongst us all, so comments are also welcome and they can go into the question panel. And Greg will make a link available for this PDF at the end as well, so you don't have to furiously take any notes. There have been some questions that have come in already. As listed there, and I find the pasture maps and forecasts very complicated on the long paddock. Interested in how to work the cost benefit of feeding during drought. A comment on weaner management and strategies for continued low stress weaning, please. Biosecurity in relation to fodder supply and weed control due to introduced hay. So I've put a few extra slides in to cover off on those. So the first half of this presentation looks at two useful rainfall and pasture websites, and then looks at drought plans, feed budgeting, drought options and tools. The second half is about how much cattle drink and eat and the associated costs, some ideas for holding breeder condition, and a look at some typical protein and energy supplements and how to cost protein and energy. Australia has one of the most variable climates in the world. When you look at the poster, you can see there's a lot more red than blue. So droughts are very common, and we've just come through probably one of the worst droughts since 1900. So how do you manage for such variability? And I welcome people's comments on that. So I'll throw a few ideas around in the presentation. If you want to actually get a copy of that poster, you can get it off the Long Paddock website. And I suggest using Chrome. I've used Internet Explorer once before and it didn't really work for me. So Chrome could help, and that might help with one of those questions as well with using the Long Paddock website. So this is the Long Paddock website. It's got lots of really good climate information, rainfall and pasture growth information and maps. So it's well worth having a look around. At the FORAGE tab, you can also download free satellite reports about your property, or if you're looking at finding adjustment or buying properties, you can look up the reports. One of the reports is the Pasture Growth Alert report, so I'd recommend downloading that one to see what your situation is. So you enter your lot on plan. There's instructions there how you can also locate your place on the map or entering an address. And then you can select the reports that you're interested in. There's quite a range of different reports that you can download. And then you enter your email address and you can get it sent to you. So again, one of the comments was about finding this site complicated. That's fair enough. There is a lot of information in there. It'll probably be a case of having to spend time and find out which reports that are of use. There is an about toolbar up at the top. It's got some webinars in there. I've never looked at them myself, but there could be some useful information there. But the other thing is there are these climate mates, which are part of the Northern Australian Climate Program. So these are producers scattered across Queensland that have been schooled up in climate information. And so they're available to help people with understanding climate. So, and you can get them through the DAF call centre. Right, and this is another site that's I think is quite a user-friendly site, and it's got really good, useful rainfall information. It's called Climate, and to find it, search for Australian Climate App. So this shows 3 examples of some of the information you can get off the climate website. How's the Past? Gives you historic rainfall and temperature data since 1900. How's the Season? Shows recent rainfall, how it's tracking compared with past years, and how often, lets you see how often certain rainfall events have happened in the past. For instance, 50 millimetres in 3 days in November in Esk has occurred 34% of the time, or 3.4 years in 10. Droughts are common and drought decisions are difficult. Everybody's situation is different and everyone is trying to do their best. There's no one size fits all. With the benefit of hindsight, would you have done things differently? This is where having a plan and reviewing it helps. If we knew what the future would be like, would you do things differently? We don't know what the future will be like. However, we can look at past annual cycles, which can help to some degree. To make the most out of hindsight, it's good to review what has happened, what's worked well, not well, and what would you do differently. I know a property manager and the owner who use this process very well. They look objectively at things that have gone badly without blame to understand what's happened and see how they can avoid similar problems. But likewise, they look at things that have gone well to understand it and how they can do more of the same. Lots of people have got drought plans and lots of people don't. So when is the worst time to make a drought plan, or a fire plan for that matter? In the middle of a drought or in the middle of a fire. So by default, the best time is before drought and then to review again after. One suggestion as a starting point is to get family and business members together with a blank page. At the top, make a few dot points of what your goals are for the business and for the livestock ownership, and also some points about your vision for success for managing through a drought for yourselves, your finances, soils, pastures, livestock, etc. Then draw a line down the middle, and on the left, the really easy thing is to brainstorm what you hate about drought. And then for each of these points, are there some strategies for managing for these things? In 2003, David Llewellyn, a beef officer from Moree, asked a group of beef producers what they learned after drought. Their best decision was destocking to critical dates. Their worst decision was not acting early enough. Key messages focused on forward planning. Know what you're going to do when was the key to staying in control. They also listed 13 learnings, which are in an appendix to this talk. And they talked about critical dates. So what would critical dates be? This is where looking at annual cycles of rainfall and pasture growth helps. This is a typical subtropical rainfall pattern. Temperature, day length, and tropical pasture growth follows the same pattern. So the bulk of pasture grows over summer. In autumn and winter, rainfall, temperature, and day length all drop, and so does pasture growth. So basically, the feed that you've got at the end of autumn has to last until you can expect good pasture growing rain and conditions, which could be in December or January, and later the further you go west. So right now really is a critical date for assessing how much feed you have in your paddocks. And there are photo standards available on the Future Beef website that can help with assessing how much feed you have. So, and this is where the pasture budget fits in for matching stock numbers to pasture supply to get through the year. So critical dates will also be around seeing how the summer rainfall and growing period is going, and then doing a stock take of pasture and water reserves in autumn. Some people have specific dates when they start looking for adjustment and consider sales, such as St. Patrick's Day or 1st of April or Anzac Day, as well as continuing to monitor and adjust through the year. Getting the pasture budget about right will help with achieving a goal of having rain-ready pasture cover at the end of the dry season, so that more rainfall soaks in, there's better pasture response and less soil loss. Spelling some paddocks for a month or two will also promote more productive pastures for the year ahead. These things can help to maintain or restore land condition, which is important because for the same amount of rain, land in good condition will grow more 3P pastures, which are the productive palatable perennials, and they'll stay greener for longer compared with poor land condition. Right, so let's have a closer look at feed budgeting. To give a really simple example of feed budgeting, if a cow eats 10 kilograms a day, then a 300 kilogram bale will give 30 days feed for one cow, or it'll give 1 day feed for 30 cows. To see how this works on a paddock scale, I highly recommend watching Cole Payton's 4 short YouTube videos. These can be found by searching for Cole Payton, Forage Budget, Future Beef. To look at the pasture budget in more detail, again, the basic idea is that the bulk of feed grown over summer has to last until next summer, with a good cover of rain-ready pasture cover before the rain comes. If there's good summer growth, more stock can be carried, and vice versa. If it's a poor summer growth, less can be carried. The kilograms of dry matter pasture available per hectare can be estimated using photo standards available from the Future Beef website or by doing pasture cuts. Then if you know how much feed's available and you know how much stock eat, then you can do a budget. To give a rough example, say you had 4,000 kilograms of useful, accessible pasture available per hectare, then for sustainable use, if you allow about 30% to be eaten by stock, this is roughly the leaf component. So after that, they'd be going on to stem, which is less digestible. And about a third would also be for organic matter, for feeding the soil microbes, and then a third would be left as the good rain-ready pasture stubble. So you might not always be able to eat a third. It would then be a case of working down to a residual so that you've still got good ground cover. So then if an animal eats about 10 kilograms a day, then this is 120 days grazing available per hectare. If it's a poor season and there's only 2,000 kilograms available, then 30% is 600 kilograms divided by 10 kilograms intake per head per day, gives about 60 days grazing per hectare. These estimates can be compared with past records and experience, and the paddock monitored to see if the estimates are reasonable or not for future refinement. Right, next we'll look at drought options and tools. If it turns out that there's too many stock relative to pasture, there are a number of options as listed in blue. People usually use a mix of these. Over the years, one thing that stands out is that there are a lot of sayings about selling cattle, and this seems to be a learning through the benefit of hindsight, which spans across generations. So there are sayings like cattle equal dollars and dollars don't feel the dry. So even if it rains the next day after selling, there'll be pasture benefits and there'll be cash, which can be a better outcome than if holding too many and if it doesn't rain. There is a range of spreadsheet tools on the Future Beef website that can assist with evaluating some of these options, such as selling, feeding and agistment. So one of the questions was about that, so I'd suggest trying some of those tools to see if they can help. This next slide gives probably an overly simplistic example of comparing selling versus feeding. So say the stock was sold early at $900 per head and then bought back at $1,500. This is a difference of $600. Say instead of selling and buying back, if they were held and fed for 270 days at $1 a day, that's $270. Or if it was at $2 a day or $4 a day, at $4 a day it'd be $1,080. And this is a feed cost alone. There are a lot of other factors to consider, such as people factors, the time involved, the labour and the stress. There's also the stress on the soils, pastures and stock. How long does the feeding go on for? It can be unknown, and usually feed availability gets tighter and more difficult and prices go up. Whole cottonseed doubles and triples usually, most droughts, going from $400 to $1,000. Also consider interest and wear and tear on gear, stock losses, and then impact on soil loss and pasture recovery and weeds. So one of the other important parts here is moving early, because moving early increases the chances of having better sale prices, but it also gives a greater pasture sparing benefits. Compared with moving later means that prices might be lower, and also more feed has been eaten before sale, so you end up having to sell more because there's less feed retained. And if the prices drop down, it increases the difference between the sale price and the buyback price, and it starts to make feeding look more attractive. But usually at that stage, neither feeding nor selling is attractive, so the economics becomes a bit perverse. So a lot of the messages you get from graziers is that moving early. looking ahead and anticipating. I found just recently, I found some examples from this note called Feeding and Managing Sheep in Dry Times. It's just fairly simplistic little templates. So I've just added that in case that helps. So the top one is selling and then buying back. The next one is if you hold and feed, and adjustment. So they'll be there. You'll be able to view those in the PDF later. Right, moving on and thinking some more about ideas for managing variability. And again, I welcome anyone throwing comments in for sharing. We've already covered the first 2 dot points, that basically stock numbers largely depend on summer pasture yield, which largely depends on land condition and rainfall. Also, wet season spelling and pasture budgets will help with keeping more productive 3Ps. Another suggestion you may hear is to stock to 75% of average rainfall. Some people in the West talk about 60%. Often the average is raised by several well above average rainfall years, with many years being below average. So by setting the bar lower, it will cater for most of the variation. Another idea is not to carry only breeders. Having some trade cattle can make it easier to sell down to a sustainable core. Another thing that can help is having a strong focus on pastures and the recognition that it's the health of the soils and the pastures that drives the whole system. So you'll often hear people talk about graziers being grass farmers and stock being used to make pastures more productive. Right, moving on to cattle. So how much do cattle drink? For a quick estimate, about 10% of their live weight. And this will increase with hot days. When the feed's really dry, they'll drink more, and then they need more water for high performance, such as lactation and putting on good weight gains. How much do cattle eat? For a quick estimate, about 2% of live weight in dry matter. So, for example, 2% of 500 kilograms is 10 kilograms dry matter. Intake will be lower with high fibre, low digestible feed, which takes longer to digest. In contrast, stock can eat more of highly digestible, well nutritionally balanced feed. Also, younger stock and lactating cows will eat at the higher end as a percentage of live weight. When I talk about dry matter refers to how much water is in the feed. So if you have a look at that dry hay in the picture, it might be close to 90% dry matter and 10% water. So 10 kilograms of that hay as fed will be 9 kilograms dry matter and 1 kilogram water. If looking at the green feed pasture in the background, say it was 30% dry matter and 70% water, then 10 kilograms of that as fed is 3 kilograms dry matter and 7 kilograms water. So she would need to eat 3 times as much. If ever buying high moisture feeds, it's very important to check your sums and cost your energy and your protein. And that's the high moisture is also the reason why spending lots of money on sprouting grain is not as good as it may seem. Changing feeds is also best done gradually. A recipe for deaths is having empty-stomached, hungry stock gutsing on a new type of feed. A gradual change is essential if you're going to bring stock onto grain, which is starch-based and highly fermentable in the rumen. The types of bacteria in the rumen change according to feed, and this takes 2 to 3 weeks. The break in the drought is also a time when deaths can occur due to combinations of starvation, exposure, and maybe poisonous plants. If paddocks are bare and stock are weak, then if they start chasing green pick, they are eating mostly water and not getting much energy. And this is also having a bad impact on the pastures when the pastures grasses are at their most vulnerable. In these situations, it's better to lock up and continue feeding until there's enough bulk. This table comes from the note Full Ham Feeding of Beef Cattle Quantities by Bill McKeenan. It indicates approximate feed requirements for maintenance for weaners, yearlings and breeders if using grain, hay, or combinations of grain and hay or silage. the shaded column's been added to indicate if poorer quality hay is used, then a protein supplement is needed to be included, and they need to eat a bit more hay as well. If stock can get about half of their requirements for paddocks, then these levels can be halved. The figures in red demonstrate the feed saving that can be made with weaning cows. If cow condition is suffering, then weaning will give her a chance to pick up condition with less feed. The money saved can cover the cost of feeding the weaner. So one of the questions was about weaners. So this next slide, I've just added this slide to cover off on some of that information. So the benefits of good weaning flows through the whole business for years, and being prepared ahead of time is important. If control mating is being used and if fetal aging is being used, then you'll actually know well ahead of time what you can be expecting in terms of weaners and ages. So really important parts of weaning is having the good nutrition for them. If it's early weaning, making sure it's the right type of feed or otherwise good paddock, spelled paddock. But low stress is really important, and that's for all the stock for better performance. But having good quality, appropriate feed, high protein, water, shelter, and there are low stress stock handling courses that are available that would be worth doing. And segregating on size makes a difference as well for reducing stress and getting better performance out of weaners. There's 3 additional resources there that you can have a look at. Carly McConnell from Mount Brisbane, she wrote a really good note, weaning and educating calves, and I've attached that as an appendix to this, so you'll have that in the PDF, but you can also find it through the Future Beef website. MLA have got lots of really good publications, and one of those is Weaner Management in Northern Beef Herds, and I've listed some additional titles in the appendix, and also the Dry Season Management of a Beef Business, which you can get off the Future Beef website. It's got some more weaning information. Okay, this table is an example of the cost of full feeding a breeder for a year. For example, say a hay and grain mix is $600 a tonne. This is 60 cents a kilogram. So if she eats 5 kilograms a day, this is $3 times 210 days, $630. If feeding 7 kilograms for 60 days and another 9 kilograms for another 95 days, this totals $1,395 for feed costs alone. And then there are other costs that also need to be considered that we talked about before. Next, we'll have a look at ideas for holding breeder condition, and then we'll look at typical protein and energy supplements, and then how to cost energy and protein. So which of these cows are most likely to be cycling? The aim is to have breeders in condition score 3 or above at calving. And this generally means that they are going to be in good condition before going into winter and feed quality drops, because otherwise it's too difficult to pick their condition back up unless they've got good quality feed. So to have a look at an annual cycle, this is a stylized diagram with the pink line representing the breeder's energy requirements through the year, with a low point with weaning around 60 megajoules and a high point with calving and lactation around 80 megajoules. The blue line reflects how much energy she might be getting out of the paddock. So in this case, going from high energy intake over what's been a good summer, and then if it's been a sort of drought year and just progressively got worse and worse and hitting a low here in October, where she's only getting about half her daily requirements out of the paddock. So what can help her to be in good condition, score 3 plus going into winter? A wet season spell can improve the paddock. If country is phosphorus deficient, then a phosphorus supplement in the wet season will lift breeder intake and condition. Trickling phosphorus in through the dry will also help with her bone reserves, but protein would be the priority usually. If cow condition is suffering, then early weaning removes a significant energy and protein drain, equivalent to a couple of kilograms of grain. Preg test and sell the empties. Pasture budgets help to match your stock numbers with pasture supplies so that you have the rain-ready pasture before the summer rain. If there's no green in the pasture, crude protein might be deficient. An NIRS, that's near infrared reflected spectroscopy test, or dung sample, can help identify if protein is deficient relative to energy. If there's a big energy gap, in this example about 40 megajoules, then energy supplements can help fill the gap. For instance, 3 kilograms of whole cotton seed gives about 40 megajoules, and that'd be about an upper level for cotton seed. Also, in this example, calving later in the year will shorten the time from calving until rain. It's best to get vet checks on your bulls before mating. And again, beware the break in the season if stock are poor and paddocks are bare. This is a list of common protein supplements, which can all work very well. That's assuming protein is the primary limiting nutrient. If protein's not limiting, then a supplement, you can give a protein supplement, there'll be no added benefit. These are fed from as low as 100 grams up to a couple of kilograms. Dry licks are very commonly used. A typical target for a urea-based dry lick is to supply about 75 grams of protein for growing stock and 150 grams for breeders. This is a list of commonly used energy supplements, and they're usually fed from about 1 to 3 kilograms or more. If using grain, it's low in calcium and sodium, so add 1% limestone and 0.3% salt. So that'd be 1 kilogram of limestone and 300 grams of salt per 100 kilograms of grain. There are lots of different reasons why you'd select one supplement over another, such as safety, availability, storage, handling. Do they eat it or not? One thing that can help in evaluating supplements is to cost nutrient that you're interested in, such as protein, energy, or phosphorus. Doing these sums is really important if buying wet feeds. Again, the lowest cost may still not be the best option. The next slide shows you how you can do these calculations. This table is available as an Excel calculator on the Future Beef website. A web-based cost calculator and feed value database is also available on the New South Wales DPI site. This table looks pretty full on, though if you can get the relevant information, the calculations are simple. The formulas are written in the table heading for calculating from left to right and from right to left. Blue figures are data entry and black figures are the results of calculations. To look at the top row, with grain at $450 a tonne, if you add $50 freight, that's $500 landed, which is 50 cents per kilogram as fed. If the grain is 90% dry matter times 12 megajoules on a dry matter basis, gives 10.8 megajoules per kilogram as fed. Using the formula F divided by J, 50 cents per kilogram divided by 10.8 megajoules per kilogram gives 4.6 cents per megajoule. This table is currently sorted on cheapest energy to most expensive. The impact of water can be seen where great mark here is $300 per tonne landed, which is much cheaper per tonne than the grain at $500 per tonne. But because of the high moisture and the lower energy, it works out considerably higher energy cost at 7.1 cents per megajoule compared with 4.6 cents per megajoule for the grain. It's also a much riskier product in terms of quality. I've heard people getting it from being reasonable quality through to being almost like compost and stock won't eat it. And then there's also chemical risk, which is one of the questions we had. So we'll talk about that a bit later. So the same process we've just used there for energy is also used to cost protein. This spreadsheet is found by searching for Future Beef Business Tools, or you can also search for the New South Wales DPI feed cost calculator and the Drought and supplementary feed calculator. So one of the other questions was about fodder, biosecurity and weeds. So after the webinar, Greg will send you an email that looks something like this, and there'll be a link there to the animal drought animals in Drought portal. There's lots of information in there, and there's also some information on chemical residues, which I've just snipped and attached to this slide. So yeah, you don't necessarily know what chemicals that could be in feed, so it's saying, well, ask the vendor. Potentially you can get a commodity vendor declaration, but you may or may not get one, and there's no obligation to give you one. So if you can't get a commodity vendor declaration, there's the 4 dot point options at the bottom there, which are that you can try and source from a different supplier, or source from an accredited supplier, or you can get the feed tested. And then the 4th dot point, only feed the byproduct or fodder to breeders or cattle that are not entering the food chain immediately. Slaughter withholding periods vary depending on the chemical and the level in the feed. In most cases, but not all cases, withholding stock from slaughter or on known clean feed sources for 60 days will be enough, which is also what's in the NBD. So the other question was about weeds. So again, you may be able to get a fodder vendor declaration, and you could also look at getting feed from that's accredited and been tested. It may be worth spending more for that than rather than the extra costs that come with having to clean up weeds. And potentially you can pay more for higher quality feed as well than lower quality feed, because you don't need as much of it. Right. The other thing would be trying to find out actually where is the feed coming from, and if it's coming from a high risk area or not, such as giant rat's tail area, and whether you can find out what's actually in the feed in terms of your weeds, but you'd also be wondering about your chemicals and whether the withholding periods have been observed. Then restricting the feeding locations on the property, so that you can monitor those areas, keeping records on all the above, and then monitoring those sites and seeing what weeds you've got and controlling those weeds. And then you may be able to get help from for instance, there are council weed officers that may be able to help you. And there's also a note there, a booklet that you can download, or you may be able to get it directly from AgForce as a hard copy, reducing weed risks from fodder. So just to finish up with a few Grazier quotes. I look after my pastures look after my cattle look after me. Successful graziers get the grass-cattle balance right and never fall in love with your cattle, but rather have a lifelong romance with family and country. So thanks for listening, and Greg, I'll hand back to you now. And just a reminder that there are quite a few appendix slides to this, which you'll be able to get from the PDF later.